Good afternoon, it's Lee Cassidy from Tactile Technology, and we're coming back for our second version of our talk about meter. So I'm going to bring in Dimi, who we had last week. Hi, Dimi, how are you?
Hey Lee, I'm fine. Thank you for having me again.
No problem at all. So we're going to kick off with a bit of a recap from last week. So first of all, we talked about some of the problems and values that meter gives on if somebody went down that route, and some of the key things were around the lack of innovation. So do you want to cover that off again, just a quick summary of what we talked about last week?
Yes, perfect. And again, I do appreciate that maybe we might repeat ourselves for some of the listeners, but I think it's quite important because this is such a big shift in the way that we've seen networks. And it does kind of remind me of my good old days when I was starting to get into cloud managed networks. That was back in 2014, 2015. And I have the same feeling, right? Back in the day, it was about how everybody wanted the CLI. Nobody could live with the UI, even if they wanted to. And nowadays, those concepts are not revolutionary anymore, right? Everybody pretty much has a cloud managed UI that is attaching to their networking gear. But we haven't really seen much change since, to be honest. I mean, I know a lot of people talk about AI. I personally see the reality on the ground sometimes might be lacking set capabilities beyond the roadmap and some slides. And this is also coupled with some of the challenges when it comes to the supply chains, which obviously squeeze everybody out, making a lot of the vendors increase their prices and just making purchasing and relicensing extremely expensive. So a lot of people are asking themselves, well, why should I keep doing that? Is there a smarter way of doing things? And this is where Meter comes in, because our model is not about selling hardware and licenses. Our model is selling a whole stack of infrastructure for your LAN that is designed for your requirements. And most importantly, can also grow as well.
I think one of the other things we talked about last week as well is the complexity when you've got multi-vendors in your environment as well, and ensuring things work together, because a firmware update on a firewall can stop a switch or something else functioning correctly. So that's again one of the benefits with Meter. It's a end-to-end single platform, isn't it?
That's a great point. And I think maybe sometimes, obviously people are under a lot of financial pressure to deliver things as cheaply as possible. It's the reality of the world we live in. So obviously mixing and matching vendors just increases the complexity in any given aspect, right? It's not just the devices talking to each other, but what happens if something breaks? And, the reality is that although all of these are architected based on standards and should work together, it doesn't actually mean that they will work together. And one of the things that we say here at Meter is build, not bought, because again, even if vendors might have multiple types of devices on their portfolio, they're usually created via acquisition and trying to change a device from how it was working in order to align with the current company and the way that their products are architected.
I think the other thing that we briefly touched on, I think you mentioned it slightly a few minutes ago, was that we're actually aligning the vendor with the customer. So commonly there is this misalignment, isn't there, where the actual vendor wants you to buy more, wants to upscale, is always trying to drive you towards more cost, sometimes more complexity as well. Whereas from Meter's perspective, what you're trying to do is deliver the best outcome for the client. So actually both of you are working in the same direction, as opposed to opposing one another.
That's a great point. I was actually just finishing a video this morning describing how although Wi-Fi 7 is ubiquitous amongst all the vendors out there, actually, in reality, probably less than 10% of devices can use it. So it's quite interesting that yes, vendors do push customers to look forward. That's actually a good idea anyways, because you don't want to be in a position where every 2 years you have to change things on the wall. But obviously, we do recognize that in most cases, customers do not actually have enough budgetary power to afford everything they want, right? So in some cases, they would compromise. A great example would be you put the latest Wi-Fi 7 access points, but the switches that they connect to are not M gig, and the uplink is just 1 gig from just one switch, right? So in that case, you still have a bottleneck and you haven't really resolved your issues. So the idea of meter is, we are scoping your network, but the network actually grows. So we're introducing Wi-Fi 7 now. Further down the line, when our Wi-Fi 8 is available, we'll slowly start pushing our customers towards that way. But we are starting with the idea that today the network is designed to meet the customer needs without any surprises further down.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about more of life cycle of a deployment, and we're going to talk about how operations helps deliver that outcome. So do you want to kick off with that? So will we start at the beginning? So we've done our design layout, so looked at the requirements of the customer. We've measured the square footage or the meterage to actually calculate the cost for the sites, and then we're moving on to now the deployment aspect. So what do we need to do as part of that process, and what's different about it with meter?
Geez, what's not different? So this is gonna sound very bizarre because I do speak to customers day in and day out, and they all say, "How is this possible? And what else do you need from us besides the floor plan and how many square feet or square meters we have?" And that's actually what's fascinating about this model. And I think at the end, if we have some time, I'll kind of maybe briefly go in more detail about how this is possible. But for now, just have this in mind that the only thing that we need in meter to generate a quote is the type of space you are deploying this into. It might be a school or an office or a warehouse, and the actual square meterage or square footage. And based on that, we will give you a cost that can be paid monthly, yearly, or even upfront if needed. And that cost will actually include everything, including, very, very important, the operational aspect. And that sometimes surprises people because the mentality so far has been, I need a few access points, maybe I need a few switches. They don't actually come before the contract is signed, because remember, we are providing a network based on specifications once the cost is agreed, right? So we have operations people that do the project management. We have both wired and wireless designers in-house that will then work together with the customer to understand exactly what's already there, if it's a brownfield. Send somebody on site, so that will be a meter qualified technician to take pictures, validate that everything looks like it should, and based on that, come up with the particular design. So think about wireless. Where are the access points today? Where should the coverage be? How many devices you have in each area? What kind of devices you have? Going back to, again, that people don't understand that so much on Wi-Fi is predicated on the end device. It's actually unbelievable. So that's very important. So we'll design based on this, and we'll even go ahead and even design a secondary coverage, meaning that if one of your access switches were to fail, not all your Wi-Fi goes down. So we'll make sure that obviously the site is big enough. If it's a small retail shop, most likely you're not going to have space for more than a switch. If the IV site is big enough, those access points are actually spread around in a way that if one access switch fails, you still have good Wi-Fi coverage before that particular issue is being remedied.
Okay, so it's slightly different to the traditional way where you do a little bit of a look around, you put together a bill of materials prior to the sale. These are all the items you need to buy. These are the license for those items. This is custom implementation. It's more of a, you're this type of organization, this is the size of your space across your sites, and this is what it will cost. Now let's design something that's going to be deliver the outcome that you're expecting.
Exactly, because in the end, what we sell here at Meter is the outcome, right? And going back to having alignment between the vendor and the customer, is that we're going from a world when, the vendor was about upselling, future-proofing, and the customer was like, well, how much I can save and get away with, because I need to justify this bill to somebody who's not technical and doesn't really get or care about Wi-Fi standards, to a world where both us and the customer really want robust connectivity. And if the customer doesn't get that robust connectivity and we're actually breaking our promises and our SLAs, the customer can actually break the contract. And they go through that trouble of having to replace the stuff, and we're losing. So it's actually in our incentive to make sure that these things are deployed correctly and are deployed based on our vendor best practices. So actually the devices leaving the warehouse will already be configured based on our best practices by an engineer that works in-house.
Okay, so the other thing is that, Meter now are going to be looking at making sure this goes to plan as it should, rather than it being the responsibility of the customer. Because a lot of times the customers have got a lot of the risk, because they've got to have calculated correctly how many ports they need, what infrastructure it's got to be, how it's going to be configured. But sometimes it doesn't quite go to plan. But in this case, because it's been designed by Meter to deliver to that environment for that specific type of organization, it's actually on Meter to make sure it works, isn't it? And goes to plan.
Yes. I think cabling is one of the main components of everything. We obviously have very high cabling standards, and all of these can actually be shared ahead of time. So if customers never purchased Meter before and are quite interested to understand what they're going to get, etc., that's something that's why we're here for. And it's very important that we will, in the same price, we will cable everything between any Meter devices. And customers sometimes ask, hey, my building is special in XYZ reason. When my response is always like, once the price is set and we agree to the price, we'll have to cable it. That obviously is very small caveats when it comes to, for example, cabling between buildings, because Meter might not be in a position to talk to the local authority on digging roads and things like that. Yeah. But in all fairness, everything that comes in within the building between Meter devices is also covered in cost. And if you have existing infrastructure there, we will make sure that we test those cables. And if they are quite old, also replace them as well.
Okay. So coming up at the beginning, we've had someone walk around the site and document exactly what's there, brownfield, or if it's a greenfield site, look at what the requirements are there, look at where the power is, look at the cable runs to get to wherever it is. They'll formulate a design based on that, but again, based on using best practices from Meter to make sure the outcomes are correct, and also have some onboarding calls with the customer to go through everything to make sure everybody understands what's going to be done.
Yes, and everything is documented. Even after the install, our technicians are trained to perform numerous tests to make sure that when the network is finally commissioned and marked as live, that is operating as said. And the trail is there, and it always can be referenced back in case there's any sort of issues. And by the way, I know probably many of your listeners might not be super excited when licensing is mentioned. Remember that with Meter, because this is a subscription, it always starts when the site is marked live. So if you're listening to this and you have 10, 20, 30 sites, and you're always in that position that you want to sign up a new vendor, but the problem is that the license starts ticking and puts you under that pressure of deploying them quickly, all that kind of goes away, right? You can still sign those sites with Meter, get that kind of financial power and that discount that those sites bring. But if it takes you like half a year to do it, that's fine. The sites will not start ticking unless they're live.
Okay. So support then. So support around in the background for configuration and also proactive support. Tell us a little about that support side.
It all ties back to the SLA, and I know I keep repeating myself, but I guess that's the mantra here. We need to be proactive. We need to monitor things. We're actually proactively monitoring devices going down, links going down, and automatically resolving support cases as well. So sometimes we reach out to customers and tell them there's a problem, and sometimes we even fix them before anybody notices. We deploy observers, access points that just scan the environment so we can get all that metadata and get to the point. Sometimes there's even degradation, and the access point automatically starts doing packet captures because maybe tomorrow somebody's going to notice it, and our engineers actually know exactly what happened there and then, and have the right view. So we spend a lot of time to make sure that we're on top of things, and when things go wrong, which inevitably they will go wrong, it's the real world, that we're actually able to handle them as soon as possible and restore full service. Another cool thing is that Meter support is also there for kind of advice and configuration. So if you're in a position that you don't have enough manpower at certain points to do certain changes, or you might not be sure, you can very easily raise a support case, and we're not going to have the usual pushback that you get with vendors that might not have sold you extra services on top.
Okay, so we're going to give a quick product overview now. So I believe you've got a slide with some product on there. So if we cover off what we've actually got there.
Nice. Well, I mean, we'll keep it simple. One of the beauties of Meter is that we actually just have a few SKUs that you can see here on the screen, and people look at this and like, all the other vendors probably have a whole manual of just the access points that they have, right? But we're not like here to upsell, so it's we don't actually need those things. Let's start with the firewall, right? A lot of people ask about the firewall. Great place to bring your circuits in. The first protection point as well, it is a next generation firewall, so it allows you to do IDS IPS, DNS security, content filtering, but also allows you to connect other sites, remote users, and even third-party sites together. We have two flavors. One is 20 gigs, the other one is 50 gigs with the interfaces to match as well. What I really like about this firewall is that as opposed to a regular firewall that is coded to act just like a Linux box and goes to a lot of trouble when a lot of packets arrive to the network interface, we're using a specific protocol called vector packet processing. And if this is something not familiar to people listening, yes, I mean, wasn't really familiar to me when I joined Meter, but it's pretty much the equivalent of, instead of using a regular airport and going through security and just pretty much going about your day like everybody else does, it's actually having your own private plane. So that means that especially when loads increase, our firewall ranges don't actually take that big of a hit when it comes to performance procedures. Then we have the switches. We have a kind of distribution switch that's just based on SFPs, and then we have 24 and 48 port access switches. The 24 port switch is PoE++ compatible, and you'll actually see that all those RJ45 copper ports, they're all multi-gig, so really match well the Wi-Fi 7 access points you see bang on in the middle. What I really like is that even the basic switch, the 24 port, has 6 25 gig uplinks. So when you're discussing about link bundling and switch stacking and all those things that we've done previously to make sure that we don't make the uplink a problem when it comes to quality of service, all that kind of goes away for most of our customers as well.
Yeah, because that's a problem, like I say, with you move up the Wi-Fi standards and you're going above 1 gig. If you've only got 1 gig switching, you're not going to see the advantage, are you? So it's ensuring you can actually get that benefit. And again, when you're stacking switches, if you don't have the speeds on the actual bus that's connecting them together, you're going to lose performance. So it doesn't matter what you've got. So you're always going to go at the speed of your slowest link, aren't you? That are between.
That's true. That's true. And I think for Meter, that's obviously like becomes probably the ISP link, which we're going to have some more news in the future about this. But yes, I mean, from a LAN perspective, this covers pretty much most of our customer base. And maybe in the next session, we'll talk about some of the things that are on our mind when it comes to the future. But this is today. The wireless access points, we have 2 indoor models, both of them tri-band, both of them Wi-Fi 7. One is more geared towards the hospitality because of those 4 downstream links, including one that can pass PoE. And we also have still our Wi-Fi 6 access points when it comes to outdoor deployments, if those are required. Again, not something that we do here in Europe or in the UK, because we're not actually allowed to run 6 gigahertz outdoors. So something definitely to watch for, but I guess it's more of a regulatory problem than anything else. On the right-hand side of the screen, a couple of the upcoming things that excite me. The power distribution unit, which currently just works in the US because of the frequency, will actually get a counterpart that will work globally. This is great because not only it allows us to monitor how our equipment is doing, monitor how much you consume, but also reboot devices remotely and kind of get rid of that, did you turn it on and off again, by just doing it from our homes rather than going to site. And last but not least, we're just about to launch in the couple of months, a 5G gateway, which will primarily be used as a backup out-of-band connection for those sites. So in case the ISP lines are down, as long as there's power, we can still reach the customer site.
Okay, sounds good. So we're a bit short on time. We've only got a couple of minutes left. So what I'd like to do is just give everybody your details again from last week, just in case. So we'll put up your LinkedIn profile first. So if anybody wants to go and visit Dimi's LinkedIn profile, there you go, and connect. We've also got the Meter website. So if you want to go and have a look on the Meter website, get some more information, see in more depth what we've just gone through quickly on this session. But next week, we're going to go even deeper, aren't we? We're going to talk about some of the AI capabilities, but not where we just use an AI chat just to ask some basic questions, but actually use it to utilize it for configuration or for creation of dashboards and information that we require to see on the Meter infrastructure.
Yes. So we're looking forward to see your comments. We do totally understand that this is a totally different way of looking at things. So if you're still scratching your head, don't worry. It's just totally normal. It's just a totally different shift of paradigm. And yes, next week we'll do a nice demo. So we're gonna show you through the dashboard. There's some of the cool things that we built, and we're gonna finish off on how we utilize AI to allow people to scale better.
Sounds good. So just go back to the name. We talked about it before. This sounds like it's tied to the square footage because it's meter, but it's spelt METER, which is something that measures things. So in our usual homes, we've got a meter that measures electricity, but this is effectively delivering a utility version of networking infrastructure across all your sites, delivered on a monthly basis, not taking account of the infrastructure that's required to deliver it, just the type of organization you are and the square footage or square meterage that you've got. So a slightly different way of doing it. So we'd be very interested in speaking to anybody. So if you want to put comments against this video or contact directly Dimi or myself, we can answer some of your questions. And like I say, next week, we're going to go into more depth and give you a bit more of a feel for the difference between what we've got here and what you're doing at the moment. So thanks ever so much, Dimi, for joining us again today. If you want to hang on afterwards, and we'll just have a brief chat. But thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and we will see you soon.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.